Hello, everybody, and I am here to talk about why we all love long series. And I mean, you're a fan? You're probably a fantasy fan if you're watching here, but if you're not, my typical viewer, that means maybe you're not a fantasy fan because most fantasy fans are reading a long series, and that's just kind of par for the course. But I think that in general, reading outside your comfort zone, reading many different things is very useful and a very good idea because it just in general gives you so much more experience. It gives you more reading experience in terms of prose, in terms of character variety, in terms of world variety, in terms of so many different things. So just reading fantasy or just reading sci-fi or just reading literary fiction or contemporary fiction, I feel does genuinely do a disservice. But let's talk about a big issue here. Most long series aren't contemporary or lit fic or anything that is outside of fantasy or sci-fi, which is a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting phenomenon that I've realized over the years, and maybe it's just because of what I've been exposed to, but at most a series that is contemporary fiction or whatever is a trilogy, like Beartown, which, by the way, great stuff, but not quite. It doesn't really reach the lengths of something like Wars of Light and Shadow, which reaches 11 books, or Disquiet Gods, which reaches 11, or sorry, not 11, 7 books, or sorry, Sun Eater, that's what it's called, or One Piece, which has 1100 chapters and is still ongoing. And has what 113 volumes, which is insane. Or, for example, Realm of the Elderlings, which has 16 books. All of them are not light, by the way. There are like 500, 600 pages at least. I mean, with one or two exceptions. And then there's the Wheel of Time, which has like 14 books, and each of them are no slouchers, like ranging from 500 to 1,000 pages each. And then things like Stormlight Archive. Each of these books is like 1,000, 1,100 pages to 1,500 pages, and we only have 5 out of 10 books that are going to be released. Now, I just think it's interesting to talk about all the different long series before I get into why we love them. Because there are so many different ones. And if I don't mention your favorite long series, I'm sorry, I probably just haven't read it. I do very much want to talk about more long series, but I do think that in general it is something worth talking about. So, let me go ahead and get into it. So the pros. I think the biggest pro of having a long series is the ability to really sit with these characters. So I think the biggest offenders, I guess, the biggest proponents of this, there we go, are One Piece, Realm of the Elderlings, and I would say The Wandering Inn. So The Wandering Inn is a web novel that is like, I want to say 14 million words in, and still ongoing. Somewhere between a third to one half of the way through the story, apparently. I'm not caught up, mind you. I'm not. I haven't done that. But I do think it's interesting to talk about. All three of these exemplify the idea of the more time you spend with these characters, not only having them more fleshed out, but more time to love with them. I think about it. When you meet a friend in real life, and let's say first time you meet them, you're having a great time and you think they're absolutely awesome. But what's really going to do it in for you is, let's say you've been friends with this guy for 4 years. And then, you know what? Of course, this guy is your buddy. He's probably your best pal. Like, and we're saying genuine close friend, not like an acquaintance. And of course, he's you probably know him well, and he probably knows you well, and because you spent that time with each other, you went to work or you went to school with him for 4 whole years, and you know him well, you had classes with him, and all these different things, you know him well, and that's why you love him. He's your friend, he's your pal, and that's the same thing here. One Piece. You spend 1,000 chapters with these little shitbags, and you know what? You love them. Their little quirks. You love everything. You get to know them inside and out, and you love them for every part of who they are and all these aspects of their character. And same with Realm of the Elderlings. You spend 16 books with these characters. Well, not all 16 books. Let's say Fitz. You spend 9 books inside his head, and you love him. You love him for his flaws, and you love him for what he tries to do, for doing his best, and all these different things. You love Fitz for who he is, and I think that's such a special and spectacular feeling of the longer you spend with a character, the more developed their nuances get. The small aspects of them, let's say, what's their favorite food, or all these things, become more vibrant. They become more obvious because you get to spend all this time with them. You get to really sink your teeth and get to know this character because you're with them for the long haul. You're with them for a good long time of your life because you probably aren't going to read this all in like a month. If you do, kudos to you, Jesus Christ. How'd you do it? But, well, let's ignore One Piece. I read that in a month and a half. That one, admittedly, is a. I don't really know if I can talk, but I think it's important to talk about. And like Wheel of Time too. I didn't even talk about Wheel of Time, but Wheel of Time does this same thing. You get to learn all these flaws and these nuances of these characters, and the more time you spend with them, the more you love them. And because you get to spend so much time with them, they get to be more well developed. It's not just an aspect of you as the reader getting to enjoy them more, but the author does require a higher standard of writing to support your experience of reading for so long. You, as the reader, must get more time with those characters, get to really sink your teeth in to why they are who they are, to really learn and understand their motivations, how their motivations affect their actions, and all these things. You get to see how they interact with different situations. You get to see so many different things. And I think that's such a special feeling because it doesn't have to be always the big stakes moments. You can also get those small moments, those cozy moments of what are they going to do when they have to go walk out on the street and go buy something from the supermarket. That doesn't happen in Realm of the Elderlings, but at least I can't remember it happening. But how do they interact that way? How does something so common that you or I will do on a weekly basis or so, how will this character do that? Because it's going to be different from how you or I can do it. How will he do it? How will she do it? How will they buy? What are they interested in? What's going to catch their eye in the market? Is it going to be a slab of pork that looks oh so very juicy? Or is it going to be a beautiful dress? And it shows all these different aspects of their character. And I think that's an absolutely special experience that you can only get in long series. Sure, in a shorter series, you might get certain things. You might be able to explore some of these aspects, but you can't delve too deeply because for a shorter series or for a standalone book, you do have to be very concise. You have to be to the point. You can't really afford to wander all that much, which that's fair, that's valid, and it's not something that should be critiqued. But at the same time, it is a benefit of having a longer series. And so that's what I've got for the first pro. And now for the second, I would say endings. Oh, endings! What a wonderful thing to talk about! You want to know how many endings I have read? Like 2. And even one of them isn't very fair. So I'm gonna use. And I know I'm holding Rhythm of War. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? Yes, you can. I have Wind and Truth up here. You see, if I take Wind and Truth out of there, I have to spend about 2 minutes putting it back in that shelf. I do not want to do that, so I'm going to show Rhythm of War and talk about Wind and Truth. Of course, don't worry, there's no spoilers here. But a great ending, like what we see here in Assassin's Fate for Realm of the Elderlings, can make the series even better. You can look back on things from the very beginning and think of the trajectory of everything. All this time we spent doing all these small things leading to this point. Or you can think of it as this is what all the themes of the story have led to. This is what every small ounce of interactions, every action, every small character arc has led up to and built up to, where finally here we are, all the character arcs have built upon each other, and to reveal this grander theme that has been slowly unveiled from the very beginning. Same with Song of the Mysteries. And now, I can't talk too deeply on Song of the Mysteries, because I am currently reading this book, mind you. And I think that it's going to be one of the greatest endings of all time. That it recontextualizes everything. And I can tell you this, even from like 300 pages of the 800-page book. It recontextualizes everything that comes before it. A great ending will come in and say the context that you had for these earlier points in the story is different. Now, of course, shorter stories can do this too. But the amount of insanity to do it on a grander scale of 10 or 11 books is so different from being able to do it on a smaller scale. Smaller scale is very impressive, don't get me wrong, but it, in my opinion, is much more impressive to do it on the scale of 10 or 11 books, because you've put so much time into that, and now you come back to that, you come back to book 1 after 11 books, and you go, wow, there's all this foreshadowing, there's all this thematic depth that was laying the groundwork for books 10 and 11 or 9 and 8 and 7 and all these things later down the line. But it began there. And all these little breadcrumbs that were left for you all along the way to see where this was all going. Or things along the way that you just didn't catch, but now you're catching them. And it makes the story richer. Because in a longer series, you do have the luxury to add smaller details that you won't notice on a first read, but on a reread, well, you can even do that in shorter series. I apologies. I'm kind of making things up at that point, so I'm going to stop there. But I do think that, and what I love about fantasy, too, is we have prophecies. Oh, the prophecies. Prophecies that we can make in earlier books and then flourish. Oh, a good prophecy. Trust me, a good prophecy just is so sweet and good, and it just, when it comes to fruition, you can smile your ass off and go, yep, there we go. But it's also fun to look at the misdirections, see where could you have taken me, or see, because it's a grander scale. Like I said earlier, you can be led on a tangent, if you will, something that makes it seem like we're going in this direction, but really we were going in a completely different direction. While I don't think it's as easy to do that in a shorter series. Yes, you can, But in a longer series, you can let the reader be misled for 2 books. Completely misled for entire novels. While in a trilogy or so, I don't think you can. I think that if you try to do that in a trilogy, that's a lot tougher. That is a lot harder to pull off in a trilogy or so. But long series have the luxury of being able to do that more easily. And also have more reveals. It allows for, and here's my other point, more world depth. This is fairly exclusive to fantasy, I will admit, but I love it. The longer your series goes on, the more alive it must feel. The more chances you get to make it feel alive. How does the economy work? How is the world changing alongside these characters? Is it changing outside of the characters? Are the characters the crux of everything? No, probably not. But they are changing things. And what are the repercussions of those things? And not only that, but what are the depths? What are the layers of all this world building? How does the world play into the greater themes? And I think that is something that, especially with longer series, they can really play into. With a huge world, you can layer into it tons of mysteries and all these different things that allow for... You know what? Can I count trilogies in long series? Like, I mean, let's think about this. A Live Ship Traders trilogy is all 800 pages. That's a long series. That's a long commitment, mind you. And things like Lord of the Rings are very dense 500-page books each, I think. I think that's fair. It's 400-page books, something like that. You look at the number of Lord of the Rings pages and you go, oh, that looks very nice and easy. And then you actually read it and you go, oh my god, this is so dense. But I actually don't think it's fair to compare it to trilogies. You know, trilogies can... How about I fight standalones? That's much easier. But I do think that in general, that is a very powerful ability that the longer it goes on, the more depth it has. And also, with that length and the more depth that it has, the more power the climaxes can have. And here's probably my biggest point. Setup. Oh my god, setup. Setup is so important in any story, setup and payoff. But in things like Wars of Light and Shadow, or in One Piece, if you've read or watched One Piece, you know this sort of thing. One Piece will introduce a villain in like chapter 2 or 300. And then you won't get to see that villain until chapter 700. Which, by the way, this was weekly. This was released weekly. I just want to remind you of that. And so, think about that. You make readers sit on this for books. You can see, you can introduce a piece of setup and then pay it off books later because you're building to it. What it does, it allows for you to build and build and build and build and build this tension and think, what's going to happen with this specific plot point? And what's going to happen with this certain aspect of the story? And then they can build the tension, the mystery. Where's this going to go? And then the more you sit on it, the more the reader wants to stew on it and go, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And you keep asking and asking and asking. And then a great finale can just really pay that off and just wham you right over the head with it and go, woo, let's fucking go! And then you just love it. You love to see it, and then you're just happy, and a great climax can make you just shout from the rooftops and go, yes, that was amazing! That was the fucking Score of the century! Great job, Janny Wirtz! Great job, Eiichiro Oda! Great job, Robin Hobb! Great job, Christopher Rucchio! Great job, Brandon Sanderson! Great job, Robert Jordan! Oh, you've all done such an amazing job! But, like, you see that stuff and you go, oh my god! You set that up in, like, book 1, and now you're paying it off in book 13! Holy shit! Yeah, it just gives the reader so much time to sit and stew on these plot points. And the more you sit on it, the more you're wondering, the more your mind wanders, and the more possibilities you think of. And then, boom! You get exactly what you didn't expect. And then everything changes. Everything is amazing and everything is good. Or even if you get exactly what you expect, but it's executed so well that you're just happy. You're brought to tears, or you're absolutely ecstatic because you get that experience. Because you get to see these characters on a high, riding a fucking horse or doing something absolutely amazing or insane, and you're just smiling all the way through. That is the power of a long series that you can't always get with a shorter one. That's what I found. Now, I admit I gotta talk about the flaws. I'll talk about the flaws. Now, I think two huge, or actually the three big, not proponents, big offenders for this can be Brandon Sanderson, Eiichiro Oda, and Christopher Rucchio. Christopher Rucchio, though, he's the exception among these three. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about Christopher Rucchio. With the first, I think, 5 books... No, not 5 books. With the first 4 books, I would say he has horrible... Like, starting a book, the first 50 to 100 pages are boring as shit. Like, they weren't that good. Let's be honest. The start to each of the first 3 books were pretty mid, if not bad. Actually, I take that back. Empire of Silence had a pretty good start. It was a pretty solid start. Howling Dark, if you ask me, it was pretty mid. Demon in White, the start was pretty mid. Kingdoms of Death, even one of my favorite novels in the series, pretty mid start. Now, Ashes of Man doesn't count, by the way. I know, I hear some of you going, Ashes of Man! No, I actually did. First off, I did like the start of Ashes of Man, but also, that doesn't count, because Ashes of Man was literally the second half of Kingdoms of Death, but just chopped out and brought into its own book. It doesn't count. It's literally the second half of a book. No, it does not count. I like the start of Ashes of Man, so hush, shut up. Now, he fixed it. I admit, let me admit this. Christopher Rucchio fixed that. Disquiet Gods had an amazing start and an amazing beginning, so he did fix it. Now, who are the 2 authors who didn't fix it? These guys got bad. No. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying they are bad. I'm not saying that what they have done is bad. In later books, they are still amazing. Like, but I'm going to use One Piece as my first example. Some of his problems got, like, very bloated in the latter half of the series, in a certain era of the story. I won't say anything too much. But One Piece, I think, after a certain point, started to shift to more plot orientation. And you can already tell from earlier points in the story that Oda has this absolute love for wacky, zany plot lines. And you can't blame him. He has a great time with them, and we have a great time reading them. But I do think he ended up focusing a bit too much on that at times in the later areas. He's gotten better. And you know what? I just realized. For both Christopher Rucchio and Oda, they have gotten better. Like, immensely better with the problems that have become accentuated. But in longer series, you can see an accentuation of their problems, of their flaws, but also a honing of the good parts. But also you see a growth in their ability as a writer. Christopher Rocchio, his debut novel was Empire of Silence, and you can see his growth over these 7 books, and it's insanely immense and impressive. It's very impressive stuff. Same with something like The Bound and the Broken. It's very, very impressive to see authors on this long journey start to create this home for themselves, this skill, and they hone in on their skill as storytellers. Now, One Piece, he does get those problems, but he's been fixing them. He has admittedly, and let me be very clear, Oda did fall into a couple pitfalls, in my opinion, but he's been fixing them, and I'm very proud of him for it. Same with Rocchio, with his beginnings. Those really screwed me over sometimes. And now, Brandon Sanderson, his flaws can become, like, bloated in later books. I truly do believe that his later books in the Stormlight Archive can really accentuate some of his flaws. Now, it's hard to put my finger on it. I'd have to reread the series, which, by the way, I've already read like 4 times. But I don't know if that's a fair thing to do or say, but I can't put my finger on it. But there are certain things about the later books in the Stormlight Archive where some of Sanderson's flaws as a writer do start to show. Oh, yes. I think Wind and Truth's dialogue especially could beat me. I swear. I've never had this problem with Sanderson or with any other writer, but his dialogue in Wind and Truth could sometimes be atrocious. Like, some of his dialogue choices, they weren't great. His dialogue was not pitch perfect, but it was all right. It was passable. It's not something as absolutely brilliant or amazing as Robin Hobb, if you ask me. I think her dialogue is some of the best. But Sanderson sometimes could be a very bad offender of it in Wind and Truth. Like, oh my god, it made me reel sometimes. It would pull me out of the story to the point where I'd be upset. But I do think some of his flaws do get accentuated in things like his dialogue. But at the same time, I do think that his good points, his great points, has gotten stronger. He makes bold moves, and I do have to respect Sanderson for making bold writing choices. And I think that's awesome. Now, another con, endings. Oh, endings. I know I said endings before, and I probably had the same reaction. I think I literally just had the same reaction. But a bad ending can really fuck you over. Oh my god. Let's make an example. If the One Piece isn't if the One Piece is something that's stupid, like the power of friendship. I know it's not, but let's say the One Piece was the power of friendship, the friends we made along the way. I'd kill someone. I swear by God I'd kill someone. You have no idea how angry I would be. I don't know if I'd ever be able to open up One Piece again. That's how upset that would make me. And I love One Piece to bits. It's a very powerful and profound story on me, but oh my god, I swear if he did that, if he made the power, like, the One Piece is the power of friendship, the friends we made along the way, I'd kill him. I don't find him and kill him. That's a joke for legal reasons, but oh my god. But I think a good example is Attack on Titan. So, and I don't have that with me, but I think it is something that's very interesting to talk about. Oh my god, Attack on Titan's ending is so contentious. It still is contentious. I remember when it released, so I was caught up to Attack on Titan when that final chapter released. And oh my god, you should have seen the fandom. Like, you think the anime people were a little divisive? No, they weren't. They were not. The anime people, I think I've heard some people from time to time say it was divisive. No, no, it was not. Not in comparison to the shit show that was the final chapter of Attack on Titan. Like, you have no idea how angry people got. How, like, some people were saying it was the best ending ever written. Some people were saying it was the worst ending ever written. I remember reading that and going, like, reading the chapter and then seeing people's reactions online and going, you know what? You people have fucking lost it. Like, people were pissed. And some people were very happy, of course, but, like, you could hear the vocal hatred some people had for that ending. And it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. But I can also imagine for AOT, and I was among the people who admittedly wasn't very happy with the ending at first. I do think, though, that with the ending of AOT, if it didn't land for you, most of Attack on Titan is kind of fucked for you. I'm so serious because Attack on Titan is one of those stories so reliant on certain aspects of where is its characters, where are its characters going, and depending on where it ends is the stance that it will take on many different things. And I believe that what's very fascinating about that is, for some people, it's ruined because they do not agree with the vision. It is the author's vision. It was the author's vision from the very beginning. He stated it, and I believe him. But at the same time, let's be honest, if you don't agree with the author's vision of Attack on Titan, I think that's very valid and very fair, but it ruins the story for you. That's my belief. I think it could very easily just ruin the entirety of Attack on Titan, because if you don't think that way about the world, I can very easily see I can very easily see people just disagreeing and not liking the ending. Now, of course, you can disagree and still love the ending, but there are certain aspects to it that if you just don't really agree with that should have been how the story ended, I can very much see that ruining the entire story, because there's so much that hinges on that ending. And so much, not really. Not a lot of One Piece would hinge on the ending. I think a lot of One Piece is really cool for how it would end, but how it ends doesn't really affect how much I love early One Piece, so it doesn't change much. I'm gonna be so honest. And then, let's talk about the big one. Let's talk about the big one. You guys ready? Why did I have this book at the bottom of the pile? Can you all guess what I'm going to talk about with the one problem, the big problem with long series? I'll give you about 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. How about it? Hiatuses. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think Germ needs to, like, I don't think he should feel obligated to make Winds of Winter. But I do think it is important to talk about. It is a flaw, and it is a problem with long series. With a longer series, you run the risk of having a hiatus. It's with this, it's with Vagabond, it's with Rothfuss. Rothfuss is a pretty bad offender. Let's admit that. He's a bad offender with this. Now, with these three, like Vagabond, A Song of Ice and Fire, and Rothfuss, their hiatuses are long, and I think it's safe to say the series aren't going to get finished. I don't believe A Song of Ice and Fire is ever going to be finished. I think Winds of Winter will come out. I don't think A Dream for Spring is ever coming out. I really don't think it's coming out. And that's the risk, especially if you're reading a series as it's coming out. That the author, sadly, passes away before the series is finished. Like, that's what happened with Robert Jordan. Sadly, and very unfortunate, but it can happen. I mean, we've seen it before. And hiatuses can really just chop out that it can kill the life of a series. It just can. It can kill any momentum. It could do so many different things. And it is the sad reality of the thing. I think Jenny Wirtz had like a decade-long hiatus, though this one wasn't even of her own fault. It was because of the publisher and a bunch of different things that I do not remember. I need to rewatch her interviews, which, by the way, I highly recommend. But it is a flaw. It is a possibility that when reading a long series, it's on hiatus. It happens and is more common than you'd think. Now, less, and I also think it's less common than most people would say it is, but it's probably a little bit more common than you'd think, especially if you look at manga. Though maybe manga's not the best example. And I think that's about it for what I have to say today. I think this video has run on fairly long, but to all of you who've come and stuck by my rambling, tell me, do you agree with anything? Do you disagree with anything that I have said here? Do you think that there's any other reasons why you should read long series that I haven't mentioned? I think it's always interesting to talk about because of so many different things. It's a very fascinating conversation. I very much love the conversation. And is there anything else that I should add? Do you think there are more pros, more cons than I have brought up here today than I have thought of? So tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that I mischaracterized any of these series? I'd love to hear it, because if you think and have an argument for why, for example, Stormlight Archive does not have accentuated flaws over the course of its run of the first 5 books, I'd love to hear that. I'd love to have the argument, or anything, really. Dispute me on any of these points. I think it's a very fascinating conversation. I'd love to have this conversation, and I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day. I will see you all next time.